Hi, I'm Adam and welcome to South Wales Ghost Watch. Now we've had a week off but we're back, me and Martin are back, we're here with you now. And today we're going to be talking about psychic warfare. Okay. Now Martin, how would you define psychic warfare?
Psychic warfare would be using psychic energy, psychic ability, either in a defensive or an offensive way. It's an approach where you store energy to aim outwards or to protect yourself. Psychic warfare is as old as the hills. Psychic warfare can be practiced every day. If you were to meet, if I came into your bank every day and said, "You're up," every day, I dislike you intently. Eventually you would start to feel really negative every time I came in.
Yes.
To the bank.
There's a confidence thing as well.
Yeah. Psychic warfare functions on the ability of the will, the ability to aim emotion and aim energy at somebody else, or to use it to protect yourself in certain situations. Therefore, it has a wide range of applications that's been used over the centuries. Curses may work because they're put with such vehemence that it hurts the person and thereby undermines their protection. So you can look at it in that sort of way.
Okay, who is Wolf Grigorovich Messin?
That's the guy tied up with the Nazis, am I right? No?
Yes. Nazi psychic, I believe.
Nazi psychic.
Yeah.
Now, there's a very interesting book. It's called Adolf Hitler and the Age of Horrors. I believe it was printed later by, it was also called Adolf Hitler Black Magician. It was a study of what went on in Germany in the build-up to the 20s. Now, let's look at what had happened to Germany in 1914. Germany had lost the war, and a great deal of negative thought affected the German people. They were basically made bust, and Germany, let us remember, is the place that the Great Depression began, the collapse of the German economy. So there were lots of people in very desperate situations. Adolf Hitler was a very curious character. If you look at the old tradition of the seventh son, Hitler was the seventh child of his parents. The 6 children before were never born because they had stillbirths, or that there was a miscarriage. And it's an interesting point that Adolf Hitler was the one who survived. Against all odds, somehow I don't think the statistics would have been that any of the previous 6 would have been like him. Hitler is a very curious character. There's a long tradition that Hitler had a mesmeric, hypnotic ability to tune in to the dark side of everybody he spoke to. He had this ability to somehow, I think Carl Jung described it as be the shadow of all Germans. And if you get a character who is very charismatic, very powerful, very understanding of the group dynamics, you find all those characteristics in Adolf Hitler. The Nazi Party was a very small party that had long occult links with I suppose the darker forces in Germany. The Nazi Party was its political wing, but below that it had an organisation called the Thule Gesellschaft, which were a very peculiar organisation who believed that they were able to contact energies, powers that would enable them to gain political power. There's this Thule Gesellschaft was a very quiet, very secret organisation that lurked behind the Nazi Party. And certain people, particularly that book I've mentioned, argued that Hitler was a medium of great ability.
And that's Lammerstein, isn't it?
And that's what Lammerstein's about, yes.
Yeah.
And that he managed to mesmerise people by using occult forces. Now, anybody who's ever sat in a football, watched a game of football or a game of rugby, can actually sense the energies of the crowd. Now, that energy can be used for both good and for bad. All we have is just energy. And Hitler, it seemed, had this ability to reach out to people, to somehow make each person think that he was talking to them, and somehow work on the prejudices that they had and use that. So it seems as if from the early part, when Hitler came to power in 1933 till about 1943, he was at the height of his power. So it seems to be that during that time he was using something that helped him control and organise people. The Nazi symbol, the swastika, is actually an inverted image of the sun from the Norse runes, or from the Aztec symbol of the sun, but it was inverted. It was the dark sun. And symbols are traditionally used as means of concentrating energy into a spot, into a purpose. So it's quite clear that whatever Hitler was using, he was using psychological stuff, but there were some very dark, murky things existing at the same time. Now, we'll probably come back to this quite a bit in the following questions.
But he had a strong influence over a lot of people.
Strong influence.
And people feared him as well.
They feared him.
Yeah.
And the interesting point was, let's remember that he dragged Germany right to the end. They were completely overrun. It was an unconditional surrender. It was somehow that a significant proportion of the German people were drawn into this and wouldn't let go. When you speak to modern Germans, they find it very awkward to talk about the Nazi period. Even today, even nearly 70 years later, 60, 70 years later, it's very difficult to get people to talk about that. It's such an uncomfortable subject.
So they probably feel embarrassed as well.
Yes, they do. You know, there's lots of trends there that need to be examined and looked at in quite a bit more detail.
Okay. So how was Wolf Messing, who I mentioned earlier, a threat to the Nazis during World War II?
A threat to them?
Yes.
Or do you mean... Yes, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
What happened when...
In terms of power,
in terms of power, what actually happened was that when the Nazis took over, they suppressed all other secret societies and gave psychics and mediums a very simple choice. They either joined or that was it. So a lot of people joined. There was an old belief that goes right the way back. I can't remember the occultist or the whatever you want to call him, who had this idea that the old Aryan race had psychic powers that they lost by interbreeding, intermingling, and that what Hitler was seeking to do was to, if you like, reproduce, in his belief, a group of people who had natural powers. If you go and if you read the history of the SS, there was a castle they used where it had 12 or 13 flames that were round a round table. And if you want to think about it, it's like the very opposite of the Arthurian round table. It was almost as if they were trying to access something else to be used. The use of energies. And it was interesting that what happened was that the Nazis turned, were always there, on Jews and the Gypsies, traditional people with traditional beliefs, and controlled it. Secret societies like the Martinist Order in Germany were suppressed. When the Nazis overrun France, Belgium and Holland, secret societies, a lot of them were killed at the order of the Nazis. What they were looking at was this belief that somehow if they contained all of that power, they would have an extra dimension to control people. And you can see what was going on politically, but there was a very powerful and a very psychological and a very powerful occult element to Nazi power.
So it wasn't greed as such then? It wasn't about taking over the world? Right.
It was a belief
Yeah.
that they would dominate, that they would start again, and so they would destroy all their opponents. So their concerns were about power and control, and using any method to learn to control people.
Okay. The Nazis developed the Physic Warfare project.
Yes.
And the years, is that right?
The Annaberg.
The Annaberg.
Yes.
Okay.
This was part of the Fuel-Gesellschaft,
Yeah.
where they believed that you could actually train people to view what was happening. And there is some sort of evidence that when the Blitzkrieg was launched at various countries, the other armies just fell apart, almost as if negative energy was used to destroy the belief in the ability to resist, which is quite a bizarre experience. When you consider the success of the Nazis for that brief period, there was certainly something else going on. They were using propaganda, they were gaining control of people's minds, and this can be done in all sorts of ways. Carl Gustav Jung wrote a book after World War II called After the Catastrophe, and one was called something about the shadow. And he said that even the images in the churches, even the image of Christ, looked different on the crosses. That somehow it was a more primitive, more vicious look. So that symbolically they were learning to control the symbols that ordinary people used. As I said, they used an inverted image of the sun.
Yeah, for the swastika.
For the swastika.
Yeah.
And I think it was Guido von List was one of their people who specialised in using traditional runes in different sorts of ways. The rune of the SS was the rune of the sun inverted. They used the idea of ice. The Germans had this, the Nazis had this belief that the earth was hollow and that beings lived there. We're not really sure how far that belief spread, but it was certainly a belief among the higher ranking elements of the SS, and particularly the Fuel-Gesellschaft, which was this organisation behind the Nazi Party, which you just couldn't join. It was like the psychic energy of the Nazi Party. And research is still being done on it. Most of the historical studies of Hitler and the Nazis.
The Fuel-Gesellschaft.
Fuel-Gesellschaft, yes.
Yeah, and there was some kind of order, German order.
A Germanic order,
Yeah,
yes. Yeah. There were stories that when Berlin was captured during World War II, there was a story that they found lots of dead Tibetans there. And in Tibet, they're in both good orders and bad orders. And that there was certainly something else going on that, say, conventional historians don't look at. So it's very interesting, very disturbing, and I know many people who will not talk about what went on during that period.
So were they anarchists, this order, this German order?
No, they were basically believing in racial purity.
Yeah.
They believed in restoring what they called the bloodline, I suppose, and somehow recreating the Aryans. You can take the idea of the root races right the way back to the Theosophical order in the 19th century, where there was the idea of these root races that were supposed to be the survivors of Atlantis. There was a mythology. How true, with all myths we don't know how true they are, but there was something that shaped the outlook and the conditions of the people. Something had to happen, you see, to be able to create the horrific experiences of Nazi Europe, the concentration camp, the hideous things that went on. Something there that was operating, that seemed to turn continually towards the negative, the aggressive and the violent in people.
Okay. So why did the Nazis and the Soviets feel it necessary to use psychic warfare?
Well,
particularly World War II.
World War II. I'm not sure whether the Russians believed in the same way in psychic warfare, but what I'd like to suggest to you is that in 1945 the revolution had seized Russia only 25 years before, and the Russian character has a very complex tradition in it. You have to remember that Russia is a vast country. It has shamanic traditions in it. It has lots of strange occult orders that were allegedly finished off by Stalin and Lenin, but always existed. And how we know that now is that once the communist system fell, all these things have suddenly returned. So I suspect that they were going on for a long, long time, those hundreds and thousands of years in that pre-Russian state that have been there. And I suspect they still have been there. In an area that size, you can't, with 20 years of Marxism-Leninism, remove traditional beliefs that have always existed. What Stalin probably did, he probably didn't believe in any of it. But of course, if the Nazis were operating on an occult front, then he would want to know as much about that as possible. Yeah. And look at the traditions, the ways of fighting it back. I mean, if you look at, say, people like Tesla, who there was always a different view about science in Russia, where lots of strange ideas and interesting ideas and original ideas were looked at. So psychic warfare is just one more way of building up a resistance, yeah, to an invasion. Let's remember the Russians kept fighting, and they were the crucial factor in the defeat of Nazism. So psychic warfare, we know far more about the brain now, we know far more about how quantum mechanics works, and it may simply be that these areas that are occult and paranormal may well be aspects that we will eventually find more about and find basis for them. But we all know that negative forces, negative energy, is tremendously influential on us. So psychic warfare is a very powerful, long-established way of battle.
Yeah, and defending yourself.
Defending yourself.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. David Morehouse, author of Psychic Warrior, developed a program called Operation Stargate.
Yes.
Which plays on the idea of remote viewing and
yes.
tapping into the unconscious mind.
Yes.
Can you shed some light on that?
Yes. I mean, if you go back to Carl Jung said that what linked all of us was the collective unconscious. Yeah. There was not only an unconscious that you and I have, there's a collective unconscious that is shaped by, is shared by all people. If you talk to the psychotics and the severely disturbed people of the modern world, if you ask them and interview them and ask them how they see things, they will produce images and stories that are tremendously similar, that almost as if they're sharing some form of a reservoir of shared images that may appear in folklore. And that might be an element of using the collective unconscious. So we know in quantum physics that every electron knows where each other electron is, so that the movement of one electron affects the world. So that may be how a lot of this happens. It needs to be taken very seriously, and I do believe that the Americans themselves looked at the idea of remote viewing. There's an old Tibetan exercise that...
Is it through telekinesis? Is it
something like that, yes.
Yeah,
how you learn to influence the world.
Yeah, yeah.
How you can roll the potentials. There's an X-Files story where somebody is able to slightly alter the odds of anything happening favourably. And that's an example of shaping in that way. There was some research done where people who were successful gamblers had stood in front of machines and believed they were going to win, and statistically seemed to be more successful. And there is research today where they ask people to consider themselves to be lucky or unlucky, and they did an experiment by leaving £20 notes around, and they found that lucky people spotted the £20 notes more than the unlucky ones, as if somehow having a positive outlook or having a negative outlook stops you having a particular chance of making the best of your chances.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting.
You know, I mean, psychic warfare. I mean, I don't know. We'll probably comment a bit more on that when we get on to another question. But there's the situation of the British example during World War II, and I'm sure you want to ask me something about that.
Yes, I will be in a second now.
Yeah.
Yes, what I wanted to talk to you about was Lammas Night.
Yeah.
And author Catherine Kurtz, she wrote this book called Lammas Night about a group of witches,
Yes.
well, English witches,
Yes.
during World War II, who vowed to protect their country from Nazis.
Yes.
You know, how was a book like this influenced?
There's a long tradition. Catherine Kurtz knows an awful lot more than I'm at liberty to tell you.
Okay.
Because I have never spoken to Catherine Kurtz, but I have seen her speak. This book, Lammas Night, was an account of what happened in 1940. In 1940, it seemed as though Britain was in severe danger of being invaded. And I know somebody, well, she's no longer sadly with us, she's not with us anymore, Paddy Slade, who was an old hedge witch from the Bath area. She had a degree in history from Cambridge University as well, so I don't want you to think that she was some sort of person who was full of fantasies.
She was a scholar,
She knew, yes.
Yeah.
And she remembers going down to the sea with her mother and creating an energy through a thing called go-away powder.
Okay.
And they chanted at Europe, "You cannot come, you cannot come, you cannot cross." And the interesting point is that Adolf Hitler lost his nerve. Now, you know, losing your nerve can be seen on a psychological level, it can be seen on all sorts of levels. But I should say, to be fair, in 1940, it was not only the witches. There was a point where the Masons, the conventional Christian churches, all got together and held a service to project energy outwards to protect the UK. And for some reason, Hitler lost his nerve. Now, Hitler was very interested in astrology. And also, he thought he recognised himself in the prophecies of Nostradamus. There's a character called Isla that Nostradamus writes about, and Hitler claimed that it was him that Nostradamus saw. But what you have to remember is that it's not the first time that that method was actually used in English history. The book Lammas Night is well worth a read. It's an excellent book. It was used in the 1800s against Napoleon. There's a tradition there. And there is a tradition during 1940 that it was a very cold night, very cold. And some of the elderly members of one of the covenants who were operating in the New Forest actually died that night, almost seeing themselves as a sacrifice to use their life energy to protect the UK. Now, I don't know if I have no evidence that actually happened, but there are lots of accounts of that. It apparently happened in 1812, and it also happened during the Spanish Armada. Drake was using, I don't know how many of you know about Drake's drum.
No.
Drake was supposed to be playing bowls when it was announced that the Spanish Armada was approaching England. And Drake used a drum. Nothing more is said. Drake drums? Now a drum is a shamanic use of using energy to call up weather spirits.
Right.
Okay? And the Armada was moving nicely towards Britain, and suddenly what disrupted them was a storm.
I think I've heard about this somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there is a tradition that Drake was supposed to be the chief, the head, whatever, of a large number of English witches who used it to call up something to protect the country. The tradition goes back even further than Drake. There is a king called William Rufus who was killed by an arrow when out hunting in the forest. And the tradition was always alleged that Britain was in danger from a French invasion. I think it was a French invasion. And that William Rufus, who knew about the older ways, chose to sacrifice himself in that way. There is a historical link between the ruler and the land. And there is a tradition that if the land is in great danger, the ruler will lay down their life to protect the land. In ancient Egypt, for example, the pharaoh was believed to be the person who made sure the Nile flooded regularly. So the tradition is not as barbarous as you imagine. You have King Arthur, if you like, in a similar sort of way, battling against the dark forces. Now, apparently, in each of these invasions, or attempted invasions, a member of the royal family died. During World War II, I think it was, I'm not a monarchist, so I don't know a lot about it, but two of the sons, I think the Prince of Wales died in a plane crash.
Right.
And it was alleged that this was a continuation of the unconscious. The ruler realised that they had to sacrifice themselves to protect the land.
Okay.
Now,
So how did they protect the land? By sacrificing themselves?
by their death,
Yeah.
they sacrificed their rulership
Yeah.
to protect their land.
Okay, right.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, historically, rulers battle, they fight, and you can see it as a continuation of that.
Right.
There's a very interesting description of. I once read a book by an evangelical Christian who laid into the monarchy claiming that they were linked with the occult. Now, I personally think that's a little bit of a lunatic view.
Yeah.
But they say that, for example, Prince Charles is very interested in homeopathy, healing, and people sort of take the mickey out of him for talking to plants, and he's quite open and things like this. There is a sort of an understanding there of things aren't exactly what they seem. And he talks about being not only the defender of the faith, but the defender of the faiths, of all of them.
Yeah.
So it's worth looking at that. Lammas Night deals with this in very great detail. It sounds incredible, but there's a bit with psychic warfare where people are zooming in and out and trying to break into Nazi occult rituals. And all of this, that's what the whole thing of the book is. It's a fantastic read. Of course it could all be imagination, but in English history and in the history of this country, there's been lots of stuff like that. You know, there is that tradition that the reason William shouldn't have won the Battle of Hastings. There is a tradition that William the Conqueror did know stuff. And there are cases where, during Saxon rebellions against the Normans, that in the siege of Ely, the Normans used a local witch to undermine the belief of the resistance actions. They couldn't find their way to the fortress of Hereward the Wake, and they used occult powers to do that.
Okay.
So the stories are there. They deserve to be looked at, and I'm not necessarily telling people that those are true, but I keep finding that this sort of story has existed throughout history.
So you have to read that, yeah, definitely.
Yes.
Lammas Night, is it?
Lammas
Yeah.
Night.
Okay.
Lammas Night, of course, is May Day. So traditionally, it's a night of where you give up something to achieve something else. I don't like the word sacrifice. It brings images of black magic and,
Yeah.
you know, whatever. But it's happened again and again.
So is psychic warfare relevant in the modern world today?
Well, let's think about that. It's certainly been dealt with. I saw a film called The Objective, which talks about a group of Americans in Afghanistan trying to find this mysterious mullah.
Okay.
And they gradually wander round and round, and they get more and more lost. Anything that shapes an ability to attack or defend, the army or the military services will look at. It's something that is still looked at and observed and dealt with, and it's one of those things that is not really talked about. It's easy to mock it, but if you look at the theme of stories, it's mentioned in the X-Files, yes?
Yeah.
Is that sort of suggestion? It's mentioned in a series I've been watching recently called Millennium. The idea that there is somehow an ability to use these abilities to view remotely what is going on. So yes, I suspect it's still being used.
Okay. So do you know if we use any psychic warfare projects now?
It's sort of not talked about, but there is evidence that people are trained psychologically in the ability to concentrate and achieve things. That's certainly going on. A sixth sense would be extremely useful in warfare. Winston Churchill, for example, was a great believer in sixth sense. He believed that during World War II he was protected, and he was a lucky boy. He got away, bombs exploded near him. 1933 he was in New York and he was nearly knocked down by a taxi and killed. He just always managed to escape. And there's a story that Churchill tells that when he was in the South African when the Boer War, he wandered into a village of Boers, and he knew that most of them would be enemies, but he used his sixth sense, and he looked round and he found one doorway and he knocked on it and it was the right one. When people like Saran, who assassinated Robert Kennedy in 68, he used the idea that he concentrated on symbols to concentrate his will. So there is clear evidence that in the last 100 years it has been used.
Instinct is kind of a sixth sense, though, isn't it?
It is, yes. It is. And we still are clearly fascinated by this. But it's a very difficult, murky and controversial subject to look at. But there is clear evidence that it's happened. Churchill employed astrologers to work out what Nazi astrologers were saying. It's interesting, of course, that Churchill was an honorary member of the Druid Order. Interesting, isn't it? I'm sure it's just coincidental.
The Druid Order.
He was taken into the National Druidic Order. He was quite interested in those sorts of things.
Okay.
But the interesting thing as well is, there is a belief that after 43, Hitler was never seen again in public. There is a belief by some mediums that Hitler lost his links with the dark side, and therefore he was a broken shell of a man. He still managed to survive the assassination attempt in 44, but there was something unusual going on there. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if, looking at these abilities of sixth sense, of telepathy, of remote viewing, is still looked at. but it might not be called it in that same sort of way. I did once hear a story, a friend of mine was fascinated, that a lot of the occult groups and paranormal investigation groups were still watched by the government. And that they had, and I'm not suggesting you, of course, but that they had, they like to send people to check out what they were doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well, nothing we do is any dangerous. Or
Well, it depends. It depends how you see danger.
Yeah.
Thinking about things can be very interesting.
Oh, well, we're always very careful.
Of course.
Very careful. So, has psychic warfare been successful over the years?
Well, if we look at that Nazi example,
From the Nazi and the Soviet point of view.
the Nazi example was successful because it was able to break the will of people. They used propaganda. Goebbels was a master propagandist.
Yeah.
We had people in the old Russian Communist Party who understood about how you got ideas across. Let's remember Stalin himself was educated at a seminary for the training of priests in Greek Orthodoxy. And I saw a program last week where they were talking about, it was a fictional account in Millennium, of where the Antichrist, who was supposed to reign, to rise up, was not in the West. His aim was to unite the 10 areas of Russia. Okay. Yeah?
Yeah.
And in this series, they suggested that he had something to do with Chernobyl and all these sorts of things. All interesting, maybe all speculation, maybe entirely fictional, but there is a continual belief that things like this go on.
Okay. Martin, thanks very much for coming on the show again. It's a pleasure talking to you as always.
And if I disappear, you know that it's you who's the spy.
Yeah, that's quite true, yeah.
Working for a bank, I don't know.
You should have said that. Anyway, thanks for coming on the show, Martin.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure as always, and don't forget, guys, tune in next week, same time, 7 o'clock, Thursday. Take care. Bye.